Good morning, students. So today's class with regard to the chapter number 3, classification and tabulation. So in the previous two videos I have completed most frequently asked questions from introduction to statistics, right? All the 1 mark, 2 mark and as well as 5 mark questions. Now I am going to discuss about the classification and tabulation in this chapter, most frequently asked questions in 1 mark, 2 mark as well as 5 mark questions, right guys? So let us concentrate first on classification concept. Later I will be dealing with tabulation. Look at here, some list of questions I have given. Question number 1. What is classification of the data? What are the types and rules or principles of classification? Right. So let us see. Question number 1. What is classification of the data? Classification is a process of arranging the data into classes or groups according to a common characteristic possessed by the items of the data. I repeat once again, classification means it's a process of arranging the data into groups or different classes according to a common characteristic possessed by the items of the data. That is called as a classification. See, there are definitely 4 different types of classifications. Classification number 1, qualitative classification, quantitative classification, geographical classification, temporal classification. Are you clear guys? How many types of classifications we have? Totally 4. First one is a qualitative, second one is a quantitative, third one is geographical and the fourth one is temporal classification. Now what are the rules and as well as the principles of classification? Rules and principles, rules or principles of classifications. Right. So there is no restriction. I mean there is no strict rule for the classification. Generally we have normal kind of principles or the rules which are grouping the data into classes, isn't it? Rule number 1. The number of classes generally should be 4 and 15. Between 4 and 15. That is the first rule. The number of classes arrangement should be 4 and 15. Next one is exclusive classes should be framed. Exclusive type of classes always should be preferred rather than inclusive type of class interval. Second one is the width of the class interval must be kept constant. So common width. So whatever the classes you have considered, same kind of width must be there. Next one is avoid open-end classes. So avoid open-end classes because open-end classes doesn't have any limits, boundaries, right? Next, the classes should be arranged in ascending or descending order. Arrangement, rising or falling it must be, or increasing or decreasing, upward or downward. So that is a thing. Last one is the lower limit of the first class should be multiple of 5. The lower limit should always be multiple of 5. So these are the rules or principles of the classification of data. Rule number 1. The number of classes must be arranged between 4 and 15. Always preferably to take exclusive type of class intervals rather than inclusive type of class intervals. Next one is the width of the intervals must be kept constant throughout the data. Avoid open-end class intervals because it doesn't have any limits. And then definitely there must be an order, increasing or decreasing kind of order, the data, as well as the lower limit must be always multiple of 5. So these are the rules. We can call it as a principles of classification. Are you clear guys? So classification definition is nothing but the data, the process of arranging the data into groups or classes according to a common characteristic possessed by the items of the data. Types, 4 different types: qualitative, quantitative, temporal, geographical. Next one, rules or principles of classification. Must be a class interval between 4 and 15, the number of classes, and then exclusive type of class interval should be followed, preferable, and width should be kept constant throughout the intervals, and avoid open-end classes because it doesn't have any boundaries or the limits, and then the data must be arranged in increasing or the decreasing order, and the lower limit must be always multiple of 5. The first lower limit must be a multiple of 5. Clear? So these are all the rules or principles of a classification of the data. Next, question number 2. Look at their objectives. Objectives means the first one. Objectives of classification. Definitely it will be asked either 1 mark or 2 mark question. Objectives of classification. First one is to reduce the size of the data. So reduce size. Always the objective. The main advantage of classification is to reduce the size of the data. Next one is to bring the similarities together. So similarities together, because we said that classification having a common characteristic, right? So all the similar kind of things bringing into one classification, one group, right? That itself the advantage of classification. The similarities will be bringing together and dissimilarities will be separated. I mean, if all the mixed kind of group, there how the classification will be done? Grouping or classes, I said. Even those classes also according to some common characteristic, whether they are similarities or dissimilarities, it will be separating it into different groups. Clear? So next one is to facilitate comparison. So always this point is there. Facilitates the comparison. Next one is to give importance to significant features of the data. That means unnecessary and irrelevant information will be definitely eliminated. Clear? So irrelevant information which is not connecting to the data, such kind of data will definitely be separated, eliminated, removed, right? Detected as well as removed. Unnecessary data or irrelevant kind of data, whatever it is, which is not important to classifying, such data will be definitely removed. Next one is to enable further statistical analysis. So definitely for the classification of the data enables further statistical analysis and give proper interpretations, give proper conclusions. Are you clear, guys? Objectives of classification. First objective is it reduces the size of the data, right? If the data is huge, voluminous, vast, then definitely by grouping or by classifying, the data will be reduced. The size of the data will be reduced. Second one is the similarities bringing together, whether it is similar or dissimilar, right? The having a common characteristic, making into separate different groups. Next, third point is it facilitates comparisons. Definitely for the comparative study only we are using statistics, isn't it? And the fourth point is bringing similarities, it facilitates comparisons. At the same time, it furthers statistical analysis. It will be very much useful to bring proper conclusions. At the same time, to give proper importance to the relevant data. So irrelevant data, unnecessary data definitely will be eliminated, will be detected and removed. So those are all the objectives of classification. Next one is qualitative and quantitative classifications. Very, very important for 2 mark questions, guys. Remember. So many times this question is asked, qualitative and quantitative classification. What do you mean by qualitative classification? As you all know that qualitative data cannot be measured numerically, right? So we can say it is as a attribute also, qualitative data, which cannot be measured, but its presence or absence can be felt, isn't it? Now, qualitative data, qualitative classification is nothing but the data which is classified according to qualities. Right, according to qualities, if the data is classified, that itself is a qualitative classification. Quantitative classification means the data which is classified according to variables. So this is according to attributes and this is according to variables. If you are classifying the data, right, here qualitative information will be included. I mean, for example, behavior, character, sex, men and women, population, employment, unemployment, smokers, non-smokers, such kind of things, qualitative statements. Quantitative statement means numbers, values, clear? So the data which is classified according to qualities called as a qualitative classification. The data which is classified according to variables called as a quantitative classification, right? Next one, stress rule formula. So when do we apply stress rule, guys? Tell me. Suppose whenever you are framing any frequency distribution table, whether it is discrete or continuous, when to use this stress rule, right? First thing is, if everything is unknown, I mean you do not have any width and you do not have how many classes are to be framed and you do not have number of classes are to be fixed, type of class interval, everything is unknown, only the raw data is given, right? Only the raw data. Such problems, to bring the frequency distribution table, we use stress rule. What is that formula? K equals to 1 plus 3.322 log n. So very important formula it is. K equals to 1 plus 3.322 log n. This is stress rule, isn't it? When do we apply this stress rule? If everything is unknown, but we have to frame the frequency table just by using the raw data. In such cases, for finding the number of classes, this K denotes as number of classes. For finding the number of classes, we use stress rule. After finding the number of classes, by calculating the range by number of classes, definitely you will be getting the width. Then you will come to know the width, number of classes to be framed, as well as type of class interval. So you can easily frame the frequency distribution table. So this is the stress rule. Next, all the basic definitions. Look at there, basic definitions. First one is, define class frequency. What do you mean by class frequency? First of all, what is a frequency? Number of times an observation repeated, that itself called as a frequency, right? The number of observations corresponding to particular class. The number of observations corresponding to particular class is called as a class frequency. Next, what is the width of the class? Width of the class is nothing but the difference between upper limit and the lower limit. So the difference is between upper limit and the lower limit, called as a width. Next, what is class midpoint or class mark? Both are one and the same, midpoint or the class mark, right? So midpoint is nothing but the arithmetic mean of lower limit as well as upper limit. That is upper limit plus lower limit divided by 2. If you add both the limits, upper as well as lower, divided by 2, if you do, definitely you will be getting midpoint. And one thing, whether it is exclusive type or inclusive type, midpoint remains same. Remember guys. So inclusive type also, exclusive type also, midpoint remains same. Next, exclusive and inclusive type of class interval. What do you mean by exclusive type of class interval? The lower limit is included and upper limit is excluded and included in the next class. So in a easiest manner, how we can write it? The upper limit of the first class is always equal to lower limit of the next class. For example, 10 to 20, 20 to 30. Look at here, upper limit of the first class is equal to lower limit of the next class. That means whenever we are framing any frequency table, this 20 will be excluded, should not be considered in class interval 1, right? It should be considered in second interval, which has lower limit. The upper limit of the first class is equal to lower limit of the next class. This type of interval, we call it as a exclusive type of class interval. So the upper limit is excluded and included in the next class. That itself is a exclusive type of class interval. What do you mean by inclusive type of class interval? The lower limit and upper limit both are included. Clear guys? So the lower limit as well as upper limit both are included in the same class. 10 to 19, 20, 29 like that. So both are included in the same class. In other way the formula, the definition can be written. The upper limit of the first class is not equal to lower limit of the next class. We can say that is inclusive type of class interval. Next, coming to frequency density. What do you mean by frequency density? When do we apply this frequency density? Frequency density in the sense, whenever we have unequal bits, right? Definitely, as we said, classification definitely should be a same width. Whenever you are classifying or grouping any data, same width has to be kept throughout, isn't it? But here, when do we apply this frequency density? Sometimes if you have unequal widths, so unequal widths whenever we get, there the frequency density will be applied. The ratio of class frequency by width of the class interval, F divided by W. The ratio of class frequency by width of the class interval called as frequency density. Clear, guys? Next, what do you mean by frequency distribution? The systematic arrangement of values of a variable with corresponding frequencies. The systematic arrangement of values of a variable with corresponding frequencies. We call it as a frequency distribution. So, frequency distributions are of two types. One is discrete frequency distribution, another one is continuous frequency distribution. Discrete frequency distribution means specific values of x with corresponding frequencies called as discrete frequency distribution, and continuous frequency distribution means all the specific values in limits in range with corresponding frequencies called as a continuous frequency distribution. Next, what is correction factor? Correction factor is nothing but, see, whenever you want to convert this inclusive to exclusive type of class interval, we use correction factor. What is the meaning of correction factor? Half of the difference between lower and the upper limits of the preceding class. Half of the difference between lower and upper limit of the preceding class called as a correction factor. Definitely in this correction factor, these lower limits will be reduced by 0.5 and upper limits will be increased by 0.5. For example, 10, 19, 20, 29. So lower limit is increased by 0.5 and upper limit is increased by 0.5. Look at them. Lower limits are decreased by 0.5 and upper limits are increased by 0.5. Definitely, look at here, exclusive type of class interval has come or no? So that is the meaning of correction factor. So with this, all these questions are most frequently asked questions from the concept called classification. Clear, guys? See, look at there once again. Define classification and its types or rules or principles. Objectives of classification. Qualitative, quantitative classification. Here two more classifications were there. One is temporal classification and geographical classification. What do you mean by temporal classification? Temporal classification is nothing but the data which is classified according to time or period, right? According to time or period. If you are classifying the data, that itself is a temporal classification. Geographical classification means the data which is classified according to areas or locations. That itself is a geographical classification. These are the four different types of classifications. What do you mean by range? There is one more. Range is nothing but, what is the range? The difference between highest and the lowest. That itself is a range. So these are all the basic definitions. The boundaries of the classes, I mean 10, 20, the boundaries of the classes, we call it as a class limits, right? Lower as well as upper limit. The boundaries, we can call them as a boundaries also. Boundaries of the class interval, lower limit and then upper limit, we call it as a class limits. This is the lower limit and this is the upper limit. So with this, I am going to wind up the session with classification concept. In the next video, I am going to discuss about tabulation, most frequently asked questions. Clear, guys? So I hope all are following the videos. Definitely watch all these videos. It will help you to revise all the concepts. Clear, guys? Right? So if you have any queries during offline session, we can clarify it one-on-one interaction. Isn't it? So kindly follow the videos. Stay home. Stay safe. Thank you. Have a nice day.